I want to pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation on whose land we are meeting. Tonight, will new workplace laws be enough to protect workers in the gig economy? And has the Matildas' incredible World Cup changed women's sport forever? Joining our panel, artist and filmmaker George Gittoes, whose new film, Ukraine Guernica, is in Sydney next month. Author, disability advocate and actress Hannah Diviney. Minister for Employment and Workplace Relations and the Minister for the Arts, Tony Burke. Independent member for Goldstein Zoe Daniel. And Nationals member for Nicholls Sam Birrell. A little later in the show, the one and only Tina Arena will be here to perform a track from her new album, Love Saves. Also tonight, should workers be legally able to refuse calls or emails from their bosses after hours? Welcome to Q&A. Remember, you can live stream us around the country on iView and all the socials. Quandra is the hashtag. Please get involved. To get us started tonight, here's a question from Sean Brown.
Thank you. The organisers of CPAC 2023 hired a comedian who opened with a welcome to country that referred to Indigenous Australians as traditional rent seekers and traditional owners as violent black men, to audible laughs in the audience. A number of high-profile National Party members attended that conference, including Bridget McKenzie, Barnaby Joyce and Coalition Senator Jacinta Price. If your party wants to be a modern, inclusive, non-racist movement, how do you reconcile senior and prominent members being associated with such attitudes?
Sam Birrell.
To me, yep, thanks. I read about that and I can't understand why people find it acceptable to make hurtful, racist jokes. I think it's got no place in our society. There's sort of, on the other side, there's a freedom of speech issue too, but it doesn't make it, so I don't suppose we should ban it, but it doesn't make it any less abhorrent to me, and I don't think it's got any place in the debate. Now, what my colleagues do and what they attend is up to them. My understanding is that they weren't at the conference during that performance, but you can correct me on that. But yeah, I just don't understand why we need that sort of racism and hurt in our society. It should be a battle of ideas, and we don't need that. You know, we don't need to hurt each other while we do it or put those personal insults out there.
Sam, that's really interesting. That's a very different perspective. You might say, you know, your colleagues weren't there at the time, but is it important for leaders in your party to denounce this sort of thing?
Yeah, I denounce it. I denounce those offensive racist jokes. I don't think there's any place for racism in our society. Gary
Johns is involved with the Formal No campaign and he said some things that have been really offensive to some people. Should he really be a high-profile no spokesman in your view? Well,
everyone's got the right, I suppose, to express their opinion. We don't have to agree to it. You know, the price of freedom of speech is that we get offended by some things. I don't agree with what he said. I mean, my position is that I oppose the referendum because of my attitude to changing the Constitution and whether the Constitution should be blind into the future to race. But we need to have this discussion in a respectful way and not attack people. And I'm very upset at the way the referendum and the debate has poisoned some relationships, including a bit in my community. So, look, we just need to find a way to disagree without hurting or hating each other.
Zoe?
Firstly, with respect to Sam, free speech and hate speech are not the same thing. That's a false equivalency. Secondly, I think that the overlay of politics on the conversation about the referendum is now providing cover to people to say things that they wouldn't have otherwise said. It's an excuse to say, oh, because of the politics, I can now voice my toxic position. And we must absolutely denounce this kind of language. And I just want to remind everyone too that we've sort of lost perspective on this whole conversation. It's sort of degenerated into a debate about models and what the voice might look like and who's going to have the power. And at the end of the day, this is just a generous invitation to recognise First Nations people in our Constitution and to give them a voice on the policies that affect them. It's a very simple question. We need to refocus.
Tony Burke, you heard the question, but also the Prime Minister has really been critical of Gary Johns and his role in the No campaign. Obviously, you're on the yes side, so you know you have different views. But where is the line on speech?
Oh, I draw the line exactly where Zoe just drew it, and that's hate speech.
And is this hate speech in your view?
Yeah, I do think it is. It's for the purpose of belittling people because of who they are. That's what it's about. It's not about an argument about the Constitution or anything like that. It's about belittling people because of who they are. And one thing, the example was about welcome to country. And I think we often forget what an incredibly generous thing a welcome is. Like, you know, you think of all the things that could be said, and the response is we keep turning up to events and being welcomed. Like, there is a real generosity in that. And, you know, there's a similar generosity in the Uluru Statement from the Heart, being asked, you know, to make constitutional recognition meaningful.
We have to show
what would it be?
Don't we?
I beg your pardon?
We have to show we deserve that welcome.
Well, that's
We're
right.
not entitled to it. That's what got us into this mess in the first place.
Yeah, and I think as a nation, we've got a real chance now to respond to that generosity with the same level of generosity in return. Like there's a really good moment in front of the nation at the moment. There's a really good... And some of the worst elements will be turned up really loudly. But I don't think for a minute that those sorts of views reflect modern Australia.
I hope not.
Hannah?
Look, I'm going to be honest, I didn't know CPAC existed until today. And when I Googled it and understood what that conference represents and who some of the speakers were at that conference, I couldn't understand how the same people who supposedly want their party to change for inclusion and diversity could be at such a conference. Because to me, that is the very opposite of inclusion and diversity. There is no way in hell that inclusion and diversity should include people like Pauline Hanson, Barnaby Joyce, Alan Jones, Tony Abbott. Pretty sure those guys have given us their track record in inclusion and diversity, and it's not good.
Let me, if I can just bring you back, Sam, the optics of that conference and the sorts of things being said at that conference, is it helpful for your Conservative brand?
Well, I don't regard the Nationals as necessarily being conservative. I joined the National...
Well, they're in the Conservative Party, right?
Yeah, but hear me out. There's a range of different views in the National Party. I joined the National Party because it cares about regions. Now, there's some very conservative people who represent very conservative electorates, and I have a conservative electorate. But there are a range of views within the party, and representing a range of people. And I think we need to respect all of those views as well. Not everyone will agree with them. But for me, the National Party is about regional Australia and coming together as a team to try and look after regional Australia, particularly when it's under such threat.
OK, but bringing you back to my question, which is, in terms of the brand of the political party you're in, is that rhetoric helpful?
Well, who's the rhetoric by?
Well, this comedian, I can quote some of this stuff. Gary Johns claimed some people in Indigenous communities lived in a stupor and recommended they learn English. Is that sort of stuff helpful?
No, of course it's not, but he's not a National.
No, but he's one of the prominent speakers in the No campaign.
OK, well, as I said before, I don't agree with his views, and there's many people in the No campaign whose views I don't agree with. For me, the National Party is about looking after regional Australia, and there are a range of views, probably from the centre to a bit more right-wing. I'm probably closer to the centre, but we've got to come together and share all those views, because it's important that it's a battle of ideas in Australia, not just everyone sort of in an echo chamber.
So, Sam, you'll notice when you said the National Party wasn't conservative that everybody in this room laughed.
Yep.
And that's because your view of the National Party, if I'm not wrong, seems to be very different to everyone's view out there. Would I be right? When we think about the National Party, we don't necessarily all think about regional Australia. Well, right? Like that's not necessarily what I think about. So I'm just wondering how you look at your view and our view, and what your thinking is about how you get our view closer to your view, because technically, if the National Party seemed to be about regional Australia, I feel like we'd all be much more into supporting it, right? Because we understand how important regional Australia is to our existence.
Well, yeah, and thanks, Hannah. Regional Australia is important to me. You know, my political views are sort of centre-right. I joined the National Party because I want it to survive into the future. I want it to be relevant, and I want it to be focused on the important things in regional Australia.
Well, let me just ask Sean, how do you feel about the answers you've heard here?
Well, I mean, I agree with Sam in that there are some sort of more moderate people in the National Party, and I'm aware that Sam is one of those people, and there have been other people presently, not so many, and in the past. I think that the image that they are selling, though, to the rest of the country with some of their behaviour can really damage the coalition brand overall, and they're struggling for their branding nationally at the moment.
But does it help that someone like Sam has just denounced some of that rhetoric, which he has?
Well, I don't think so, because I think that when you say there's freedom of speech and we need to respect everybody's opinions, I don't think an opinion doesn't deserve respect. An opinion, if it's a terrible opinion, it deserves to be called out. It deserves people to get angry and yell about it.
Yeah.
And there's not freedom of speech. There's freedom of speech, but there's not freedom of the consequences of what you say.
All right.
Sorry, I was just going to ask Sean, I suppose with freedom of speech, the question is, do we ban it? Or do we, you know, sunlight's the best disinfectant, and do we say that you can say it and you don't go to jail, but we're going to call it out as being offensive and racist?
Well,
and
I don't think anyone's calling for a
ban
ban out of this debate that I've seen. George, how do you view it?
Well, I feel that if the no vote wins, suddenly on the BBC and CNN, Australia's going to start to look like apartheid South Africa, and these kinds of racist comments are going to be put under the microscope, and it's not the Australia that I know and love. I don't want people thinking that we're like Tear Branch, and that's what it sounds like.
But if there was a no vote and we don't know what the outcome will be, does it really send, you think,
I think it does. I was very lucky to be in Pretoria the day that Mandela did his rainbow speech.
Oh, wow.
And that's what it's all about. Australia should be the rainbow country where we... And that's how I love it. That's the Australia that I love, not a divided country with this kind of racist hate speech.
I'll give you a right of reply before we move to the next question on whether it would send that image to the world.
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think there's a lot of attitudes to this are about what your attitude to the Constitution is, and whether it should be blind to race, or whether it should have that racial component in it. And I understand that there
is already race.
I know there are also
Constitution.
races. If someone wants to bring a constitution amendment eliminating that, I'm very interested. So I think, you know, it's such a polarised debate about if you know you mustn't have respect for Aboriginal communities, and I don't think that's fair, and I don't think that's true.
But is it not fair when you hear this rhetoric? Isn't that part of the issue? Well,
the rhetoric and a person's opinion on whether this is an appropriate constitutional change are completely different
But
things.
this is the official... these are some of the official campaign moments.
Well, I mean, I'm not quite sure what what you want me to say. Everyone who is not in favour of this constitutional amendment is not a racist person.
No, but these comments were.
These comments are racist, and I've said that, absolutely. I say it clearly.
Quick comment from you, Zoe, the next person's waiting.
I think the coalition's playing a really dangerous short-term political game here. The conversation about the no case is about short-term politics, not the future of our country. And I see in my community, this will edge people further and further away from a Liberal member if they are going to be associated with this kind of commentary.
I have to ask, you're obviously one of the Teal independents. Are you saying that you think this is actually going to potentially help you at the next election? Well, I know that's not why you're doing it, and just to be clear, but it will.
I believe in it fully, and that's why I'm doing it. Yeah. But if my community votes above the national average for the yes, which is very likely, possible, and the coalition has said no, what does that say about the distance between my community and the coalition?
All right, next we're going to hear from Kai Johnston Anderson.
Thank you. As a performing artist and a costume maker for film and TV, I rely on gig work and short contracts, both of which are difficult to find post-COVID and during the US writers' strikes. Would the government consider artist-specific financial support that understands artistic practice and our particular needs? Tony Burke.
And you're right, your arts workers haven't been treated like real workers. And we've seen that over a whole different aspects of culture war, but right through to JobKeeper, where it was great that we had a wage subsidy, but if you wanted to design one to cut out a whole lot of arts workers, pretty much nailed it. On Thursday of this week, we're launching creative workplaces. So it's part of the cultural policy. It's headed up by Kate Jenkins. It's then 3 worker representatives, 3 employer representatives. They're going to be charged with the job of working out where we might set some additional principles on safe workplaces and where we might set some additional principles on proper remuneration and helping people through. Some of it's complex, obviously, and that's why we want the sector to actually take control of it. But effectively, most arts work, or a lot of arts workers, have fallen outside the industrial relations system. And so what we're doing is separate to it. Effectively, they will start to set standards, and it'll take some time for them to put it together. But the standards they set, the initial rule will be, if you want to come looking for government funding for what you're doing, then you've got to abide by these standards that come from creative workplaces. So there's not many questions where I can say, we're starting it on Thursday, but we're starting it on Thursday.
OK. Well, I've got to go back to you. Does that address some of your concerns?
A little. A slight tangent is applying for the existing support, things such as AusStudy and JobSeeker. We find, particularly my partner and I have both been looking recently and had trouble with things like they ask for separation certificates from jobs, and when you go and work for somebody for 4 days, you're not going to have that sort of proof of employment both starting and finishing. So even the existing support network that's out there, it doesn't cater to the needs of everybody. It has an expectation.
Tony?
Yeah, there's a series of examples like that. It's there in how social services runs. It's there in the differential fees for doing a course as well. Yep. And it's going to take us some time to be able to turn around the different principles. So I'm not going to argue against what you've said, but I don't actually have an answer to be able to fix
George?
it right now.
Yes, I've got something that you can do on Friday to help every painter in Australia and make me the most hated person by every art dealer in Australia.
Go for it.
And that is that when I started out as an artist, galleries would take 30%. Then it grew up to 40%. Now the average is 50%. The gallery that I had in Sydney was taking 60% on sales. The average is 50, and could move towards 80. So we're not represented. Artists work from home, and in Ukraine, people are prepared to die for their culture. Art is very important. From you'd agree with this. From when you're a child, you know that you're an artist and you know that you're different. Look at me.
Absolutely.
I know I'm very different.
You've got great locks.
And you get into trouble, you know, like people discriminate against you and they say you're not really working. What you do is not really work. It's too much fun. It's almost like everyone wants to punish artists because they enjoy what they do.
So what do you want him to do on Friday?
So what you could do on Friday is put a cap. You know, the people that painters work for are the dealers, and it's wrong that they take more than 40%. There should be a cap. We can't do it. Artists all want to have their work seen. So what the galleries hold over them is that, well, there's plenty of other artists that'll come to the gallery and will show their work. I want my work from the Ukraine to be seen. But I've actually walked away from my two galleries, the one that was taking 60% and the one that was taking 50%, because it's wrong.
Are you willing to look at a cap?
Yeah, a cap. We need a cap, and that's something you can do.
Okay.
Have you ever realised that was necessary?
So I'm not going to be able to say this for Friday.
He might get in trouble for doing that.
But I'll never be able to get an exhibition again. But thank God for regional galleries and public galleries that can show my work there. But young artists can't. You know, I mean, my work's studied in schools, so they want to show it at Hazelhurst Gallery, SH Urban, Deakin University, these
So
places.
what commitment can we get from Tony Burke?
So what commitment we can get for the young artists who want not have to give...
Back on Radio National in the morning.
But an artist, look at this, an artist...
George, let him answer.
No.
Are you going to do it?
An artist has to work, only gets an exhibition once every 2 years. A dealer shows 12 artists a year. And so they're making the money of 24 artists, and the artists have to pay for the paint and the materials, they have to live, they have to pay for their studio. It's just not fair. It's straight out wrong.
Okay. Can I say the different meetings that I've had, including some actually with Allegra Spender's helped organise in her area, I haven't had it raised in this way, so thank you for raising it. The main stuff that we've been doing so far, there's some stuff with the NAVA code, the peak body code, and there's some specific work that we're getting the Fair Work Commission to do on the awards. The other area that we've done, which is a similar concept, but doesn't hit this, right back when Peter Garrett was Minister, and we're now expanding it internationally, is for resale rights, because we've had a problem, as you know, particularly First Nations artists, but not only. They sell at a low price and then it gets resold at a much higher price, and make sure there's ongoing commissions. So we're in the area. What you've raised, George, hasn't been put to me before. I'm not...
Okay.
But do you agree that it's wrong that galleries should take 60% and the artists get 40 after 2 years' work and all the cost for the materials?
I don't know enough about what's involved in terms of...
Kind of doesn't sound right, though, does it?
No, it doesn't sound right.
I can tell you it's as wrong as could be.
And the widespread... But you've raised it.
Artists
Let me have a look at it.
represented. They don't have anyone strong like you to help them.
That's how you get change done, ladies and gentlemen. You just saw that happen in real time.
Yes.
I think this is the first time probably in the world that anyone's ever stood up for artists and say that 60% is too much. The artist, you know, should get at least 60%, not the gallery. It's about time someone said it.
Now, there's another thing I want to raise with you, Tony Burke, which is at the Labor conference over the weekend, I think there were quite a few things that you agreed on, including that workers should have the right not to be contacted by their bosses through emails and phone calls outside of work hours. Is that something you're going to put in legislation?
It's something... There's been a Senate report, actually led by Senator Barbara Pocock, but the Labor members have come out in favour of that as well. It's something that at the moment it's not in the bill that I'm about to introduce, but if you... Like, it used to be the case, if you were on call, you'd get an on-call allowance. You remember you'd know someone who was carrying a beeper, they'd have an on-call allowance because they could be contacted at any point. The moment we all bought our own beepers on our phones, people are just being contacted.
It's true, which is why the union's pushed for this. Do you think it should be in legislation?
It's something where we haven't made a final decision of government. I am really attracted to the idea.
You would contact your workers out of hours, wouldn't you?
No. And look, there's a different arrangement in terms of their overtime and things like that. But I am respectful of weekends.
Right. I don't think... Look, full declaration and all the politicians would, I have no respect for your weekends, do I?
She's like, will you come on Radio National in the morning, guys?
Now, and this gets us to our topic of our online poll. We're asking you, should workers have the right to ignore phone calls and emails from their bosses after hours? You can cast your votes anonymously on the Q&A Facebook, Twitter and YouTube accounts, or the ABC News Instagram account. We'll bring you the results later. Our next question is from Glenn Hosking.
Thanks. The support for the Matildas over the past 3 weeks has been unprecedented, with huge numbers at live sites and television ratings that have hardly ever been seen before. Over the weekend, the government announced $200 million in funding for women and girls sport, acknowledging that it falls well below the level that is provided for men. Why is it that it took the success of the Matildas to bring about this change, and why wasn't it already part of a policy platform?
Hannah.
I reckon I can guess. Because we couldn't see it. You can't be what you can't see, right? Like, how amazing is it right now that the #1 person in Australia is a queer woman of colour? She's of the fact that times are changing, I don't know what is.
Who could you possibly be talking about?
Who could I possibly be talking about? Hi, Sam, if you're watching. But yes, no, look, I run a women's media company, and we have seen our biggest growth ever at Missing Perspectives over the course of the Women's World Cup, because it seems like people are finally getting the message that women have value. Spoiler alert, we always have. And that our stories and our success matters. And I think the $200 million from the government is an excellent example of putting your money where your mouth is. And I think compared to the fact that, like, FIFA announced today that the Women's World Cup has made $900 million in revenue, beaten only in the history of any sporting event by the Men's World Cup in Qatar last year, like, that's an indication that we matter. And I think, like, today the AFL also announced that they're finally doing equal pay for the AFLW, and the Wallaroos have got a statement out at the moment asking for more support from Rugby Australia. And I just think now is a really important time. I'm not really sure what's going on in the zeitgeist between the Women's World Cup and Barbie, but something is finally happening.
Zoe?
Look, the Matildas have been extraordinary, obviously, but we can't just go, oh, that was great, and then settle back into what we had before. I have girls, I had a schoolgirl today come up to me and say, please talk about facilities for girls' soccer teams, girls' AFL. I have girls in my electorate, one of the wealthiest electorates in Australia, changing behind trees, giving up sport because they have to change in the car. This is just not good enough. I have been raving on
because they know they can't go as far as.
Oh yeah, and but also they don't feel safe.
Yeah,
you know, these things are all interconnected. You know, it's to do with gender equality and equal pay for equal work and equal profile for equal performance and making women feel safe and girls so that they can perform to their full ability. It's not just about what happens on the sporting field. It's about what happens in our communities, what happens in our schools, our universities. And making women empowered to actually achieve what they can. And we've seen that with the Matildas. It's a turning point moment. We have to use it. And thanks for the $200 million, government, but we need a lot more. There are a lot of girls.
The situation's quite dire in regional areas. Since I got elected, I'm on a mission to train with every football and netball club in my electorate. And
how's that going for you, Sam?
Yeah, I've done
really
10,
curious.
and there's more of them than I first thought.
How many more do you have to get to?
Probably 26. Netball's harder than football, but you see the state of the change rooms, and it's really terrible.
Can you just repeat that for 1 second, because I just want to flag that, like, the Diamonds won the Netball World Cup
good point.
and didn't get a single cent of prize money.
I just want to draw attention, and we should be putting this money towards, sport, community sport, women's sport. And I must say, I believe that the financial commitment came because The Prime Minister suggested a holiday, which would be a huge cost to the economy. The Coalition suggested 200 million instead towards...
250.
250 million towards facilities for women's sport. And to their credit, the government has agreed to do that.
OK, why so late, Tony Burke? Did the women have to outrate everyone in the history of Australia to get just an injection like this?
There had to be something significant and additional after what has happened throughout the nation. Like, there had to be. You couldn't have we talk about like the Matildas on the field, but you see what happened in every community and in every lounge room and at the live sites and everything. Like the shift around the whole of the country and the excitement has been breathtaking. So there had to be something additional as a response to that. I think importantly isn't just that the money's there, it's how it's being worked out where it goes. Absolutely. It's not colour-coded spreadsheets. The minister's not picking this electorate or that electorate. It's being done with people like Liz Ellis. You've got a serious board of women who have seen right from the community level up to the elite level, making the decisions about where it needs to go. And I think how the money's being spent is at least as important as that it's coming.
George, how do you reflect on what we've just seen?
Well, I love what Hannah said about the LGBTQ community. I've got a very personal story, and I'm one of the few people that's been lucky enough to go and see Sam Kerr play for the Chicago Red Stars back in 2018. I'm her biggest fan, and she'd love to have me come around. She hadn't heard the Australian accent for a while, and she was doing it tough. And just to know that there was an Aussie there appreciating her brilliance, and she'd win for them in every game. Probably one of the greatest footballers in the world. But I've got a grandniece, Serica Shillingsworth, who's an athlete. She plays an American football and basketball. She's gay, she's Aboriginal, and she's an artist, and she's doing it really, really tough. So we've been watching this, and Sam, and half of the team, Matildas, are same-sex, their relationships. And so this just shows me how much sport can do to bring positive social change. Serica was almost levitating when that goal, that last penalty goal was scored. It was just so wonderful.
I think the whole country was levitating.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, you can imagine.
I haven't stopped levitating since that goal.
And so it just proves to me that things like the arts and sport can bring the changes that we all need.
And I actually hope that, from the Matildas and from seeing the success, I know in some ways it's a lot more socially acceptable for them to be out because there's all sorts of toxic masculinity ideals.
Well, just tonight on Four Corners, Louise Milligan has a story about the fact that we have no out AFL players, male AFL players.
They've got to be in there.
Well, that's the point, Zoe. I mean, that's why.
It's actually really shameful that is still so feared to come out as an AFL
But of course
footballer.
it is, because look at the way the media... the only sports person we've really had in Australia that's come out was Ian Roberts, and that was back in the 1980s, and he was treated terribly. But the fact that, you have all the stuff with, the Manly Pride jerseys and all the furor that happens every time there's a Pride round or whatever, because people have got different religious beliefs or teams, for whatever reason, don't agree with same-sex relationships, which, why is anyone's relationship anyone else's business? Not in my book. Of course people aren't going to come out, but hopefully, looking at the Matildas and looking at the support, that might be one of the flow-on effects that we don't expect.
I think it's a game changer.
I hope so.
Absolutely.
I hope it makes members of the LGBTQIA+ community feel accepted.
Yeah, and of course, them being gay is just part of their story.
Yeah.
They're excellent athletes, and that's their main story.
That's their thing. It just happens to be an "and" on the end of their story, not... It doesn't have to be the full story.
Now, if you're just joining us, you're watching Q&A Live. George Gittoes, Hannah Diviney, Tony Burke, Zoe Daniel and Sam Birrell. Plenty to get to tonight. Here's Ella van der Voot.
Across the last few years, regional towns such as my hometown Dalesford has been losing long-term rentals to sites such as Airbnb. While tourism has always been an important part of Daylesford's economy, the rising cost of living is risking locals' ability to secure affordable housing. What can be done about this to ensure that the economy of the town is maintained but locals are able to stay?
I'm going to start with you, Sam.
Sure.
You're a regional MP.
I am,
Should Airbnb be basically... Should there be legislation around this?
I think it's something that we need to have a discussion about. I read in the Channel 9 papers, I think on the weekend, about Bright, and that Bright is the town that sort of has been swallowed a bit by Airbnb, and that makes it difficult for the people who live in Bright and do important things. I think one of them was the butcher, having to live in a caravan because it was just, you know, Airbnb rentals are just so important, and so you know, pervasive through the town. I think the Airbnb discussion needs to be had. People have obviously, if they've got an investment, they've got the right to do what they want with that investment. But we also want to open up more stock to people who want to live there permanently. And we need more people, as you know, in the regions, because we've got a great economy in Shepparton at the moment, and right across regional Victoria, but we need people to move there. I think we've also got to really look at cutting a lot of the red and green tape that stops us from developing new housing stock. Yep. That's a real problem for us in the regions.
Zoe, do you think there needs to be reform around Airbnb specifically?
Look, I think it's arguable, and I know a lot of local government areas are looking at this, and I think, personally, I think it's a case-by-case issue because there's a lot of tourist towns that are specifically affected, places on the Great Ocean Road, Bright, Daylesford is an obvious one, other parts of the Gippsland coast. So, yes, and there are precedents for this overseas. I mean, you go to New York, for example, you can't officially rent an Airbnb. You kind of go in and the owner will say, if anyone knocks on the door, just tell them you're my sister, kind of thing. So because of shortages of housing stock. So other countries have moved on this. I think in metropolitan areas, though, there's sort of different questions. I'm not convinced it's going to have a big impact to sort of impose levies or act on this in metropolitan Melbourne because it's not such a concentrated area. So I see it more as a local government issue, and I know councils are looking at it.
Tony Burke, the National Housing Agreement came out of National Cabinet, but there was a mention of it in that statement, but the kind of can was kicked down the road a little.
Well, I think that's because, in large part because of the issues Zoe just went through about different answers for different parts of Australia means that something like this will be dealt with by the states and local government. The big thing at a national level is we need more housing stock. And getting that extra housing stock with what's happened with building costs is harder than it was as well. So I'm not arguing against it, and different states and local governments will put forward different policies. Some of them have flagged that. But I think, yeah, as a federal government, you can run a risk start where you spend all your time on the turf you're not in charge of. And it gives you a good way to thump the table, but it doesn't actually get a lot done.
Sometimes you need to intervene, don't you, when the turf is, well, broken?
Look, the big intervention for us is the work that we're doing, trying to make sure that we get more houses built.
Next, we'll hear from Daniel Lawrence.
Thank you. Origin Energy last week reported an 80% increase in profit to more than $1 billion, and at the same time refuses to pass on falling wholesale prices to consumers. Instead, Origin increases dividends, pays out outrageous top management salaries, and I believe political donations to Labour. Tony, when do you intend to take accountability to stop price gouging for excessive profits? And how about Labour starting to reject political donations from the worst price gougers that cause inflation?
Well, your name was in that question.
I think that's corrected to me. Thanks for the question. Can I deal with a couple of different parts of it? The first part, in terms of donations, we have never waited for the law to be changed before we've had tougher rules on donations ourselves. We, for example, for many years now haven't taken money from Big Tobacco. Don't take money from James Hardie. We report anything over $1,000, even though the law is set at a much higher threshold. Everyone will have different arguments on that, but I just want to give that as the starting point. The second thing, is there price gouging going on or not? I know there's different studies being done. The one thing that I am very pleased with the question, if I can just note, is that it gets us away from this rubbish argument that somehow workers are the reason that we have inflation. And the number of times I've heard people talk about some fear of a wage price spiral, even though as wages are going up at the moment, inflation's been coming down, is basically a way of people punching down. There are two definite causes of inflation that we have at the moment, and you've put forward something that may well be a third. But
okay, the ACTU is trying to find out if price gouging...
That's right, and it'll be a serious inquiry. They've got Alan Fels.
But why isn't the government doing that? I mean, even if it concludes one way, what will you follow those conclusions?
We've got a regulator in the ACCC that is actually charged with looking at those sorts of issues as well. But it's still the case. I don't want to get away from the fact that most of what we've been dealing with inflation has been supply constraints and what's happened internationally.
Okay. Does that answer your concerns?
Not at all, no. I mean, first of all, I contacted ACCC with that example. They say they're not responsible. It's obviously nobody's responsible. Everybody moves it around. And I believe it's so obvious that it's price gouging. It has been proven by the Australian Institute that 69% of inflation is caused by excessive profits. I don't think it needs an investigation into that. It needs action. And your lack of action, I just don't see how you want to solve it, or what's your action that you're planning to do. And I think it's we need cheaper energy now, not maybe or in 12 months or partially. And the energy providers keep manipulating the prices for higher wholesale prices and then never go down, only go up, I think.
Okay. Tony, I'll just give you a right of reply.
Oh, just on that, at the end of last year, we put legislation through. It was controversial. We only just got it through the Parliament to be able to put some limits on what happened with some of the energy prices. With everything that's happening with prices and the way people are doing it tough, I know it doesn't sound like anything, but had we not done that last year, prices now would be significantly higher than they are.
Okay. Now to a question from David Hayden.
Hi. Why is Labor currently discussing a streaming service Australian content quota of 20% when the quota for commercial broadcast is 55%? The European Union has a quota of 30%. Indonesia insists on a 40% quota, and Canada imposes a 45% one. And what will be done to make sure that these quotas won't be filled with poorly made content and that a diverse range of Australian voices are seen and heard on these platforms?
Okay, well, that's quite obviously a Minister for the Arts question, but I want to start with you, Hannah, because I know that
Of course you do, PK. Why wouldn't I be the obvious answer to that question?
You're obvious here.
Yeah, sure.
Come on, you do.
Come on.
You do this work.
Well, I do.
You do?
Yeah, so people pay me for it and everything.
I know, it's amazing.
But yeah, I'm also a big fan of the idea of quotas. I agree that Australia's streaming service quota needs to be higher. The stipulation that I would make is that there needs to be more investment in scripted content. And what I mean by that is content that's not reality television. So... So I don't know about you guys, but I was watching the Logies recently and I was astonished at the level of how many reality TV shows Australia seems to produce, which, granted, America and the UK do it too, but they have a more equal scripted content balance. And I think what Australia is missing is investment in diverse voices for scripted content, for creation of shows. Like the most popular show on Netflix across the board for a while there was Heartbreak High. Like, if that's not an indication that Australian scripted content can do well on the world stage, I don't know what is. Like, we're seeing The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart do really well on Amazon Prime. We're seeing all sorts of Australian shows. Like, look at Colin from Accounts. It's doing incredible things.
So, Tony, the question specifically about having a high quota.
Yeah, so we actually have, like, in your question, you referred to a 20%. The government hasn't made any decision on what the percentage would be. And what we've committed to is from the 1st of July next year, there will be an Australian content quota, an Australian content obligation for streaming services. Anyone watching this show at the moment, they probably have a remote control really close to them. And if they're on the public broadcaster, they'll get scripted Australian content. Mystery Road at the moment, you've got Bay of Fires every Sunday night. If they flick across to commercial TV, there's Australian content obligations. If they go to pay TV like Foxtel, there's a content obligation, some great shows that they produce. You just mentioned Colin from Accounts. The Logies, the 12 cleaned up there as well. But if you go to streaming services, there's no obligation. So Heartbreak High, fantastic show that Netflix is doing there, but there is zero obligation.
So how high should the obligation be?
Well, that's what we're deciding. Like, decision hasn't been made, but
what's your view?
My view is the objective is this. It's about the relationship between someone sitting on their lounge and watching their screen. And I don't care what platform they are watching through. I want Australian stories to be part of their experience in watching TV in this country. I want it to always be the case, and I don't want the condition of watching scripted drama to be you only get it if it's got a North American or UK accent attached to it.
OK, so it should be consistent.
Well,
so then
the viewing
you're saying
experience,
agnostic to where it is, so it should be consistent, the quota
You
then,
can't
right?
do it identically for a really simple reason. Broadcasting, the broadcaster chooses what's on at different times of day. On a streaming service, you choose what you're watching at different times of day, so you can't do it the same way.
So then it would make sense to consult with artists when you set that quota, no?
Yeah, we are.
OK, good.
Yeah.
That's good.
And are they telling you they'd like it to be 40%?
Maybe. Maybe.
Like other areas have done, you know, what is the EU is 30, Indonesia is 40, you know, Canada is 45.
I mean, I'm ambitious. I feel like we could go for a 50-50 split.
Yeah, because like, I agree with you. Like, I don't want, like, I know my friends with kids, and they're growing up with American accents. Because,
there is Bluey.
Because there is Bluey, but they're watching.
Could I just offer that the other part of this is not only the content quota, it's the intellectual property of the artists, which is being lost to these incredibly powerful international streaming companies. Australia has like a $3.5 billion market. We have roughly 3.3% Australian content on Netflix, and the bulk of it is back catalogue, so old ABC programs from years ago. And when artists sell their rights to get a program made, commissioned, they lose those rights into perpetuity. So this is a conversation that I've been having with Tony, and I know the industry has as well, that, you know, there's a strong argument for those rights to revert after 3 or 5 years. So that the artists get them back. And that's part of the quota.
Yeah, actors and writers are striking about this in the US.
Right. Yeah, which is the perfect time to commit to Australian-made projects.
But we should retain the right to our stories.
No, we should.
Yes.
This is our
And Tony, are you
heritage.
looking at that retention of the right to our stories?
Where there's a few different ways you can potentially deal with that. You can deal with that through Screen Australia funding. You can deal with that through the quotas. It's one of the things that's been put to us. I mean, these decisions.
Are you working on it? Because obviously it's a huge issue.
Oh, it's a huge issue. Michelle Rowland and I are doing this work together, but decisions of government haven't been taken yet. That's why I'm giving the frame as to how and why.
But can I just say quickly, like, that content quota can't be from Australians who all look the same.
Yeah, OK. Yeah.
Just
that's a good point.
Just saying.
Sam, would you support a high quota?
I'm supportive of a high quota. I've spoken to Screenwriters Australia about it.
How high do you want the quota to be?
Well, I'm not going to put a number out there.
Why
I just
not?
think it should be high because I don't like just coming up with something off the top of my head. But a high quota, and the reason is because we need to tell our own stories, and often those stories are told and inject economic activity into regional areas. I mean, Echuca in my electorate is still significantly positively affected by All the Rivers Run, that was a miniseries filmed back in 1983. So there you go. And these things have great, you know, it was great for tourism, and it showed people, you know, that great era of the riverboats up and down the Murray, and it's been good for Echuca. We can do that with stories throughout the regions, and so I'm supporting you, Tony, on that one.
Okay, everyone wants to go to Echuca now. And we can bring you the result of our online poll now. We asked you, should workers have the right to ignore phone calls and emails from their bosses after hours? Stop texting me. More than 14,000 of you responded. Here's how you voted. 93% said yes. Well, geez, that's subtle. 4% said no, 3% said you're not sure. To finish tonight's discussion, here's Daniel Jung.
George, you've journeyed from the streets of Jalalabad to the ghettos of Miami and encountered profound human distress in many countries. Considering this, what duty or role do you see yourself having as an artist in translating these experiences into art?
I think in Ukraine at the moment, the artists are saying we want to take up a gun and fight, but their mothers and fathers and everyone in the family is saying, no, this is what we're fighting for. Russia's trying to destroy our culture. We're prepared to do that. You've got to continue to do your art.
The pen is mightier than the sword.
For me, it's all. Back in 1986, I made a film, Bullets of the Poets, about the poets in Nicaragua who were fighting with their poetry. It's been a theme throughout my work, and I don't just work in painting, I work in film as well. The ABC showed our film about the streets of Chicago a couple of years ago, and we've just made the film in Ukraine. You can't do enough, and as an Australian, it's like the issue of the streaming. This is how we identify who we are as human beings. So when we show one of our films, for example, in Amsterdam, it might be about ice cream sellers in Jalalabad, people come up and say, Australians must be very caring people. And through our films, we show how much we care. But for me, I've seen too much war. Like Zoe, we have a very common history, Cambodia, Rwanda, Somalia. In Rwanda, I was at the Kabaya massacre where thousands of people were slaughtered. And you can never do enough. But if I had put down helping collect babies and children and saving lives to draw or photograph, I couldn't live with myself. So I'm there as a human being, not just as an artist saving lives. But also, Helen, my very brave wife, is over there. Helen comes with me, and we both feel that it's not enough to get the films on, show the exhibitions, the paintings. We have to do something there. So that's why in Ukraine recently, the House of Culture, which is as big, almost as big as the National Gallery of Victoria, the Art Gallery of New South Wales, have been destroyed, had been targeted by the Russians. Putin wants to deny that Ukrainians have their own culture. And all the houses have been destroyed as well. And what we could do is go back and get rid of the bombs and the unexploded audience and get rid of the rubble. And we created workshops and studios, and we had exhibitions. All the galleries are closed, so we were able to let everyone see the best art that was happening in Ukraine. And that was organised by 2 Aussies. And then soon the neighbours had come over. And they're still just, they're very educated people, but they'll be boiling water on stick bits of wood, and they're living under canvas in terrible conditions. And it warmed their hearts to see what we were doing. We did big murals on the wall, and Helen sang, and we got performances, we got pianists in there. And, little girls would come over, and first of all, we'd see their ballet shoes in lockers, where the whole room where they studied ballet had been destroyed. And then we'd find them living in their home, and there's one little girl, Eva, who is creating a box of memories. And I said, why are you doing that? And she says, I want to show my children, and she's only 8 years old, what I went through. And a beautiful thing's happened recently. It's still too dangerous to go into Irpin in your own domestic car, so they're running buses into Irpin. And it's very depressing for people because quite often they see their house, how badly destroyed it is for the first time. And then the bus drivers bring them to the House of Art, which we've restored, and their spirits lift up. It's something's being done. And that's it. That's showing how much Aussies care, how much we care. And, You know, in Afghanistan, I'm one of the biggest critics of the Taliban. I did Miscreants of Tollywood, and the Pakistani Taliban offered to cut my head off. But I believe
That's quite the badge of honour, George.
yeah, but the thing is that we've got a school there. We've got an arts. It's the only art school in Jalalabad, and most of our students are women, and Helen teaches there. And we've moved it now. We've bought the house. We've moved it into the tribal belt where we're free of the influence of the Taliban and ISIS. And we just don't want to give up on those people. Every day we're feeling guilty that we're here tonight at Q&A and we're not there. I'll be back there in a couple of weeks. And to me, that's the most important thing. We all saw the disgraceful, disorganised way the Americans left. People on the aeroplanes, you know, they had eyes on the ground, they took off and the people fell off the planes. It was a disaster. But we're still there. We've seen how our special forces murdered and killed people and went over the line, became a rogue force. We're still loved. And
some of our other special forces calling it out, which obviously was how we know. So I just want to bring you in, Zoe, before we move on. Obviously, George mentioned that you too have seen some of these places. Obviously, art is part of that storytelling, but journalism was also a powerful part of that storytelling.
Right, and George and I were talking earlier about how our tracks have kind of crossed over our working lives, and it's a different kind of storytelling. Journalism is sort of much more direct in many ways, but to be able to tell those stories through art, I think, is incredibly important in country. To give that colour and life to people who are struggling through incredible adversity, but also to enable those outside to find another way in to those stories and that reality. Sometimes people don't want to watch the news. They can find another way in through the work that George and Helen are doing. Very brave people.
Yeah, you are, and a tribute to your wife too. And that's all we have time for. Thanks to this excellent panel: George Gittoes, Hannah Diviney, Tony Burke, Zoe Daniel and Sam Birrell. And thank you for sharing your stories and questions. Next week, I will be live from Sydney with Q&A. On the panel, Olympian, doctor and author Jana Pittman, politicians Gordon Reid and Aaron Violi, and author and editor of Mamma Mia, Jessie Stevens. Head to the Q&A website to register to be in that Sydney audience. Finally tonight, something special to close the show, a live performance from Tina Arena. Here she is with the song Cry Me a Miracle. It's from her new album, Love Saves, and she's touring Australia in October. Good night.
Snakeskin boots and a leather face. There's no rain. I told the devil stay the hell away. Rusty chains round a memory. Take your wheel. I got half a mind to drive you all insane. You break what you love, but I won't fake it. I can't be anything that I'm not. I tried everything. Who did nothing? You did. You forgot. Want me back? Cry me a miracle. Ghosts and a broken dream, diesel fumes and the radio's playing same and same again. Dirty sheets, I go day to day. I can't sleep, but who's counting when I chase these ghosts? ghosts away. I need a little bit of you don't know. You need a little bit of pain 'cause you break what you love, but I won't fake it. I can't be anything that I'm not. I tried everything. Who did nothing? You did. You forgot. Want me back? Cry me a miracle. Break my back. Things get critical. You look back. I go spiritual. Nobody walks away. You couldn't stop my feet from running. Hear what I had to say. And now you're late. You break what you love, but I won't fake it. I can't be anything that I'm not. I tried everything. Who did nothing? You did. You forgot. Want me back? Cry me a miracle. Break my back. Things get critical. You look back. I go spiritual.